Thank you. I, want to reflect on what both of you have said. And I think the place that I'm at in this precise moment brought to you here by your words is my desire to celebrate community, to celebrate our communities, to honor our collective wisdom. There are reasons that we value family as a structure. There are reasons that we have extended family structures because we have had those systems and those structures work for us. Whether they're validated or not validated by dominant systems and structures is really irrelevant. But I want to celebrate your wisdom. I want to celebrate our community wisdom. I also want to acknowledge that the very act of migration for you, for our mothers, our fathers, our grandmothers, and grandfathers is an act of hope. It's an act of irrational optimism that through our work, through our dedication, because of our commitment to our families, to our children, that we can and will be better. Many of us have survived wars and famine, extreme financial poverty, and I emphasize financial poverty because it is not the same as cultural poverty. And while many of us may be economically poor, we are not culturally poor. On the contrary, we have a cultural and traditional richness which is beyond compare, and we don't talk about it enough, we don't celebrate it enough. And so that, I think, is the source of our resilience, the source of our strength, the source of our irrational hope and optimism. And I just want to celebrate that. I want to celebrate our unique ways of knowing, our unique ways of being with each other, and how we support each other, how we come together in these times to give each other medicine that is spoken and unspoken, measured and unmeasured. And so I just want to thank you both for your presence, for helping our families, for helping our communities, and Ana, for bringing us together to celebrate.
Is there anything I haven't asked about that you want to make sure is spoken into the space? In terms of audience, it's not uncommon for individuals who are working across systems, really, to be looking at videos like this. So education, medical, transportation, mental health, physical health, and so on. But it's also not uncommon for people who are in management roles to be seeking some guidance. Is there anything you want to make sure that people are hearing today?
If I can, I think it's really important that during these public health emergencies or any other developing pandemic, that planning for serving our families and our communities not be an afterthought. That it not be something that someone remembers at the very last moment of planning, but that our voices, that the wisdom of my colleagues, which we have just heard amply demonstrated, gets brought into the room, gets brought into the planning, gets brought into the committee, not the subcommittee of a subcommittee of a subcommittee, but that we center that wisdom from day one, that we honor that folks who are from those communities have a lived experience and a lived wisdom that you cannot find in academia, that you cannot find in academic books around how to organize our communities. We know how to organize in our communities because we come from those communities and because we've had to organize as a matter of survival. And so it is so important that our communities not be an afterthought in the planning, emergency preparedness planning, in the execution, and might I be so bold as to say, in the resourcing of those efforts. To us, that is the ultimate measure of equity and inclusion, is if we are folded in not only to the challenge of the moment, but to the opportunity of the moment. Thank you.
I'd like to expand on that, Alberto. I think seeing our community members as experts is definitely important, and not only in preparing for and planning for whatever, but I think there's a lot of us out here doing the work. Also, let's talk about who we're leaving out, and how, and the depth of diversity within our communities, and to make sure that we're excluding people who don't speak the dominant languages. And just like English, Spanish has the same role in Latin America, and we have so many indigenous languages represented here as well. And so let's talk about the Native community and the area. Let's talk about the rest of the indigenous communities that are migrating here, whether they're indigenous to Africa or to Latin America, Europe, etc. Like, there is a lot of diversity within our communities, and let's bring in those experts that may not have that academic knowledge that Alberto's talking about, but they do have the traditional knowledge of plants, medicines, things like what Mariya brought up, like how do we eat culturally, what are the foods that are traditional to us that are going to help us heal. And I think when we work in community and we work as a family, we have a more holistic approach to the work, because there's the elders are represented, the youth are represented, different sectors of the community are represented, and always asking who's missing. We have members of our community who are blind, who are deaf, who have different types of mobilities. And I think that those are the people that we often leave out from the conversations, people dealing with different learning abilities, autism, who may not speak Spanish as their first language or English, and understanding. So I have to say this as an example. I've often been hired throughout my career as a Spanish speaker because I can negotiate the different cultures. But they also put me in charge of working with a lot of indigenous people. And as a white presenting Latina, it's hard for me to sometimes buy the trust of different people depending on their history with war and marginalizations within their own countries. And so, making sure that we understand how diverse our communities are, and not just hiring people of diverse backgrounds and abilities to be the diversity experts in the room. Hire them in all positions, include them in all aspects of the conversation. Our youth, our elders, like we have so much, this country was founded on a pandemic. We brought disease to the Americas early on. And so if we really think about it in those terms, then we're talking about a 500 years history of survival. Right, and people understand how to move and do these things, and so tapping into those expertise, and then using so I'm not sure if I'm saying her name right, but Sarita Hammond, who does culturally responsive teaching, did a workshop a few weeks ago, and one of the things that she really hit home with me was just using this opportunity to deepen our knowledge, whether it's knowledge of self, knowledge of our community, knowledge of your children, knowledge of your past or what have you. It's just, it's not so much to push forth and keep going, because this is really just shedding light to a lot of inequities that we know already exist, and so we know that we can't go back to normal. And so how do we plan ahead, and how do we include everyone in our different people in our community? And again, I think what really hits close to home is just people with different mental and physical abilities, learning abilities, and different mental health conditions as well, because we often are afraid to talk about those things. And because how much we've been persecuted and how the mental health system historically has treated people of color and refugees and immigrants and Native folks. And, you know, we have to also recognize the traumatic history that people have with our systems, and how do they respond to that, I think is really like what brings a lot of passion to my heart.
Yeah, I want to add, I certainly echo, I think, both those statements in not making it an afterthought and really making sure that we include it throughout the entire planning process. And then at the same time, recognizing that the people we hire in these diverse positions are experts on other things apart from just diversity, right? We have, I think, a very multi-layered perspective to bring to all kinds of different fields with this equity lens, right? And they don't always have to be so separate. I think you can recognize the value of both those things and them coexisting. And I also wanted to add, since you mentioned, you know, that this might be a resource that's helpful for managers and so on, I think that we as people who, you know, are in this profession, and at the same time, I feel like, I won't call it a burden, maybe let's call it a responsibility to our communities, right? As Ursula mentioned earlier, we are kind of conduits of resources and maybe leadership and strength building within our communities, which does take a toll, right? If you're in these spaces professionally where you haven't had access before, or maybe you don't see a lot of people who look like you or represent your particular perspective, right? And taking on that role in the professional arena with your coworkers, with your leadership teams, to continually push forward and make the case for why this work is important, right? It's this real duality that I think that people who work in this field, it's a very real responsibility, which can be really exhausting, right, as you're trying to move this work forward. And so I think it's really important for managers and leaders to recognize that and really help create the space where we can continue to thrive and continue to be fed, right, to take on these kinds of responsibilities. So that's just something that I've certainly struggled in different work environments, in making sure that the commitment to equity is real and not just a checkbox on a piece of paper, right? And all the resources and the kind of HR practices and all the things that it implies.
Yeah, I so appreciate the way that this unfolded and the multi-dimensional layers, sort of the thread that feels alive for me in each of your shares is that, again, the notion of DEI is so two-dimensional in a lot of workplace settings, and that's really where the failing happens, is that it's not actually taking in the breadth of the complexity of what it means to actually do work that involves equity and access and inclusion. And you each demonstrated that so clearly in your shares, that it's none of it was centered on only one thing. It just brought in so many other layers. And it feels like that's an invitation to the workplace to continue to find ways to invite that multiplicity of this otherwise checkbox-like concept. That really, that's kind of the danger and the thing to look out for, because the checkbox is not what's going to actually sustain us, especially during time of crisis.
Ana, I just want to thank you for giving us this space and this time and the opportunity to center our voices, as an example, we are rarely given those opportunities and the platform to do that. And so thank you for being thoughtful and a friend and an ally in that way. We appreciate Trauma-Informed Oregon and appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you.